So,
Hello and welcome to a Tuesday. My voice might disintegrate halfway through this meeting, but that's okay. I'm not the most important one here anyway, so I'm mostly useful for typing. So let's see. So we talked about this last time and we didn't get super far, so I guess we should just pretend the conversation never happened almost. Just start over, I guess. Tarek, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so this is a proposal to have deconstructors for the date and time types. And this is mostly for two reasons. First is for performance. So when requesting the date and time parts from our types, we do some calculations for every part. So if you requested every part separately, we have to repeat these calculations with everyone. But if we requested, like if we have a deconstructor like this and requesting all parts together, so we'll do this calculation just one time and return everything. So this is going to help with the performance. And second reason for this is to be nice edit. Like writing clean code more. Instead of like calling the type 3 times just to return 3 things from it, you can call it just once with like returning tuple, value tuple with the parts. It will be less code to write, I think, for that. Yeah. So last week we started discussing this. And I think the request is reasonable, but we got some feedback about like if we should use a named methods instead of using deconstructors here. And I want just to reiterate about that, about like what balance about like comparing about if you have deconstructor or we have a named methods instead of deconstructor, which way is the better here. And I think also Jeremy had some questions that he didn't have a chance to ask it last time, but I'm not sure if he's still remembering it or not.
I know one of the questions I had was why our deconstructs didn't match our constructs. Like, there wasn't perfect alignment between the constructors and the deconstructors.
And are you talking about all of them or just the
in general
time offset? In general, I think there is match. We have a constructors for date time, for example, which is take year, months, day, and we have another constructors which is take day, months, day, and minute, hour, minute, seconds, and we have another constructor that takes the rest of stuff. So for date time, I think we have match for the constructors here.
Yeah, I don't think the point is perfect ability, right? Because some of the stuff you take in the constructors, like a calendar, I guess, to do some computation or something, which probably you can't retrieve afterwards what calendar was used to do the computation. So I think that's fine. I think the general philosophy of deconstruct is, as the name implies, is basically giving you back the inputs that you stored, right? So I think anything that you have as properties, I think you should be able to retrieve, right? And then the order in which you retrieve them should ideally match should match the constructor so that people know what they're getting, right?
Yeah.
I think that to me at least, the problematic aspect of this proposal here is that, I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think it is fine, and I think at least for the simple cases where you only retrieve 3 values, I think that's a fine way to do it, because the order, I think, matches people's intuition based on the constructor, right? But I think once you talk about the one that has like 6 or 7 outputs, like, do people really want 7 outputs when all they cared about was the time portion of daytime, for example, right? That seems a bit unfortunate that you have to basically discard 4 values before you get to the one that you actually care about.
Right.
And I think at that point, I think you really cross the realm of like, maybe it doesn't make sense to have a deconstruct and instead have effectively a named method that gives you back, let's say, a tuple, right, where you get trivial deconstruction from the tuple, and then it's relatively easy to understand what the return values are if you say, I don't know, deconstruct daytime or deconstruct date or deconstruct time, right?
Okay. Is it possible we can have a mix between deconstructors and named methods?
I think that would be a fine way to do it. I think the question becomes, you know, the another option you have is basically just say you, for example, for datetime offset, you could just, well, I guess for both datetime and datetime offset, it would equally apply. You could basically return the date portion and the time portion as a date only and as a time only. And then if people don't care about them, they can only discard one of them. And if they care about all portions, they can recursively deconstruct, right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as
But
I
then you
mentioned,
don't match the constructors, yeah.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just to recap here about like the suggestion here is just to have a specific methods returning specific parts that users can care about, right? I mean, like, get me like the date stuff, get me the time stuff, or get me the all stuff, something like this, right?
Yeah, I guess my question is, like, I think at least my intuition would be that people would use the deconstruct that takes year, month, day. That seems pretty uncontroversial, right?
Yeah.
Do we really think that a lot of people will do the one that takes 8 arguments or 7, whatever the number is, down to the millisecond, basically? Or sorry, down to the microsecond.
Yeah, I'm not expecting many people will need to do that, but yeah, I'm not expecting. Yeah, I'm like for the time deconstructors, the proposal here. I mean, the first and second one will be the most used ones, which is I think many people is going to use those. But the third one is just provided because like we already have this other parts on it, and we just giving a way to get it from deconstructors. That's all.
And what's actually missing in date time is that one goes from second and then does the one with milli and micro, and there's a constructor that's milli without micro.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Because the complicated thing is the more out parameters it has, the more perf benefit there is to calling it. Because if we're saying that there's the perf reason, then it's you taking the number of ticks and doing math to figure out what the year is. Then you know, if you want all the pieces and you're calling all the properties right now, it's you're doing math on that same number over and over and over and over again, right. Where it's really computing all of these, effectively computing all of the values at the same time. And so, yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, like for the one that returning year, month, day, yeah, this is will be just one calculations for sure. But if you add like the second, minutes, seconds, whatever, I mean hours, yeah, this will be like multiple calculations while users about maybe caring about the time only, not caring about the year, month, day during that time. So it depends on the user scenario at the end about like if they cares about the performance that much, I mean, maybe they don't need to request all of them at one shot, right? I mean, at the end, I mean, like it depends on the scenarios that how users, I mean, what is the scenarios that users want to get everything or get part of it.
Yeah. Have we ever overloaded deconstruct?
I mean, it's designed so that it supports the scenario. So,
sure.
There's nothing wrong with it. I don't think we ever done that.
Yeah, I don't think we've done it yet.
Because I mean, I think the only places where we added it was where the arity was kind of fixed, right? Tuples, obviously, and then key value pair is the other one that I know of. Index does it as well. Range does it as well, I think. But yeah, they're all like kind of very simple placeholders about what effectively is a tuple already.
Because yeah, I feel like the two, like if you want to look at it as triplets of values, I feel like from a date time, YMD and HMS are both common. I only care about 3 parts.
Right.
And
I agree with that. Yeah.
so I think when we were talking about it last time, I think that's where Steve Tobe was going with. Maybe date time just gives you the date only and the time only, and then we have the deconstructs on those.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting as well. Like, to me, that seems like the nice thing with that approach is that basically the granularity is almost independent, right? You could say, oh, for the time only, I care about the microsecond, but for date only, I only care about the year, right? Like, we can't have combinations of overloads that can do that for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So this is almost like independent of the deconstruct recommendation, a good idea, right? Because right now, to get a date only and time only from a date time, you have to call the constructor with the date time, right? Are we suggesting there'd be some sort of property?
I mean, so the problem with the property was that we already have a property called date, which doesn't give you a date only, just gives you a date time again with a 0 portion for the time, or the 12 a.m. portion for the time. I keep forgetting it, but like one of them basically, right? But I think I've used date only and time only in a few places, and I agree generally with the sentiment that we did not do a good job plumbing these types through, which basically makes them extremely inconvenient to use right now. And so I think independent of that, we should consider, for example, having date time, having a constructor that takes a date only and the time only, for example. That would certainly make logical sense, right? And I think if we had that, then I think it would be fine to have a deconstructor that gives you back a date only and a time only. And then, well, if you want to do further, then you go further from there, right? But I think even if we had that, I think then the question is still like, is the deconstruct into year, month, day so common on daytime that maybe we should still have a deconstruct that gives you the 3 pieces directly, right?
Yeah, it's very common in date time. Yeah.
And so I think, I think generally speaking, I think deconstruct can be overloaded based on arity. I think that's generally a fine thing to do. What we can never do is overload based on types, or if the arity shifts, right? Meaning like, oh, we have 2 components for the date and then 5 for the time, and then you want it the other way around, right? More for the date and less for the time, right? That's kind of where you kind of screwed. So I think what we should do is give people the date only and time only from a date time and the date time offset, and that you can deconstruct all the way down to the microsecond level if you want to. And I think then we can still have conveniences on daytime and daytime offset that just gives you the things that most people care about, right? And then it's just, yeah, you always have the path to get everything in one go, but it might not be a single deconstruct method, right? Like, especially the microsecond one, like, does anybody ever care about this one? Like, that's the thing. I'm like, do we just have it for completeness reasons, or do we think there's actually somebody who says, I want all components, but I don't want to pay the cost for doing the computation like 7 times? I'm
just questioning here about today we have a way to convert from date time, for example, to date only or time only. Mm-hmm. I mean, so what we are adding here? I mean, like if we just have a deconstructor give you date only or time only or something like this.
Well, what it gives you is basically the 2 components, right? Which today is actually not easy to get.
Yeah, but still two other types, which is you need to deconstruct everyone if you need all parts, for example. So it's a kind of 2 steps now. I mean, just for the user to get what they need.
Well, it depends on how you write it. I mean, like, the deconstruction is recursive, right? You can just say, open parenthesis, and then you can basically deconstruct them in place, right? So instead of saying, open parenthesis, year, month, day, close parenthesis equals date time, you can say open parenthesis, year, month, day, close parenthesis, comma, some name, and then you basically would deconstruct the date only portion into three things, and you would just keep the time only portion as one thing, right? So this way people can effectively dial up they can take all 12 components if they wanted to, or they can only take the date only thing and then discard the time only thing, for example.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but the coding pattern would be a little bit complicating, like having multiple parentheses and like which one. It's not cleaner, as I think.
No, it's like, what I'm saying is like, I think the question is, what do you want to get out of the system, right? Like if your most common scenario is you want to just get year, month, day, then I think having this deconstruct method that takes year, month, day is fine, right? If you want to get the time, the problem today is that you call this overload that takes 7 parameters, and then you may discard half of them because you only cared about the last 3, for example, right?
Right.
And then I think the problem of that is we can't really provide conveniences for that, because the only thing we can do with deconstruct is grow towards the right? And just add more things there. And so it's basically, once you have these 3 as you proposed it here, that's the ones you're stuck with.
There's nothing that says we couldn't do the other approach, which is a named method, and we could have, ignoring the naming, get YMD and get HMS, and those both return threeples.
Yeah, I think my only concern with that is that I think to me it kind of makes sense that you can deconstruct the date time directly, but it seems a bit unnatural to call a method that gives you something you can deconstruct, because that's not a pattern that we generally have. So I think the question is, what is the natural deconstruction of a datetime or datetime offset, right? And I think the answer is, well, whatever the constructors gave you. So I think in that sense, what we have here is the natural deconstruction. I'm just not sure that that's a very convenient deconstruction. But yeah.
Okay. So let's look at date only and time only first. Reserve those. If you agree with the deconstructors of those, and after that we can decide about like what exactly can be done for datetime or datetime offsets. Because like what I'm hearing here is like, even if we have datetime to return like tuple of date only and time only, for example.
Right.
So we will still need to have the deconstructor of date only and time only.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think they look good to me. For time only, we might even consider having one that just gives you hour and minute, because that seems reasonably common. But
are they currently on your screen, Emo?
Well, they're on the other screen where I have it slightly written differently, but yeah.
Okay.
Right. So again, with time only, we shouldn't skip the milli without micro. And since we have a constructor that took just hour and minute, then a deconstructor that takes it seems sensible.
Right.
The int64 tick constructor doesn't need a deconstructor because that's just the tick's property. Also, I don't know if you can deconstruct one.
I think you can. But it's a bit weird.
Yeah. How about we just say no one parameter deconstructors?
I think that's probably fine.
Okay, so if we agree with date only and time only deconstructors, is it possible we can have for datetime or datetime offsets, like still having these deconstructors, but also we can expose the getting date only or time only from them? We have both options.
Yeah, for date time offset, I feel like it's only if we want to add a deconstruct on it, and whether we add it on the type or as an extension method. I kind of think it should only deconstruct into a date only, time only, and time span, and that we should not have any of the other ones.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? If you just look at date time, I think we could say we probably never need a 2-arity one, because the smallest thing you would get is year, month, and day. So you could say you have a date-time deconstruction into date only and time only, right? And then you have the other ones as conveniences, right? But then I think for date-time offset, it becomes problematic because, yeah, the minimum one would be the ones you mentioned, right? Date only, time span, offset. So now you're kind of screwed. You can't have the one that just gives you year, month, and day, right? So you would always have to output the time offset now, which is maybe okay, but then yeah, I don't think that's particularly convenient either.
Right. And then on this one, if it is that people want from a date time offset, ignoring what the offset is to know what the, just the date component, presumably we either have a way of getting the date only easily, or we could add a get YMD type method to it.
Right.
But yeah, like it feels, the deconstructors feel less natural on date time offset because of the offset.
Yeah.
Unless we just say we'll give you the 3 components.
I agree with that.
I mean, you could even get behind, like you give them 3 and 2, right? I think you could say you still have the daytime deconstructor into just, the time only and date only, right? If you don't care about the offset, right? But you can also easily say like just call the one and just discard it, right? Like I mean, it's a 1-character thing now, right?
Yeah, and that one's easier because offset's actually stored as a separate field, so it's not doing work that it's throwing away other than a.
Right.
I mean, it's doing the copy, but it's not doing other work.
I mean, I personally like that because I feel like the natural deconstruction of these things is into these 3 logical components, right? Date only, time span. That seems
right, especially given the 4 types, right?
Right.
Date time is date only plus time only, and date time offset is those 2 things plus an offset.
Right. But then I guess then the question is, if we were to do this, would you literally remove the ones we currently have proposed, or would you just keep them as conveniences?
I would start with ripping out all of the current proposed deconstructs for date time and date time offset, and then let someone try and argue really hard to put the component one spaced back and not just the date time or date only and time only ones.
Yeah, I think
less is more.
I think in terms of perf, it would make 0 difference, right? Because effectively you copy the same amount over the stack, right? There wouldn't be any real difference, right?
I mean, in terms of perf people should care about, it's no different. I think the fact that you end up calling 2 methods means it's like 11 instructions longer.
But if you recursively deconstruct all the way down, yes. But my bet is people don't do that.
No. Like the deconstruct the date time into the date only, and then deconstruct into the year, month, day. That's 2 method calls and 2 outrights.
That's what I mean. If you basically just accept the date only and time only, then you only call deconstruct once, right? If you then recursively deconstruct further, then you would call the nested deconstruct once, right? But I would assume most people don't do that. Would be my bet. Because at that point you can just access the properties of these guys, right? Which are probably cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm probably okay with keeping the other ones around as well, if for any reason, then because we have constructors for them. And inversely, I would say if we add the deconstruct that gives you a time only and date only, then I think we should add the constructor that takes time. It seems a bit weird to get something out that you can put in, right?
Oddity of saying we should, leave them because they match constructors is, so why don't we add the ones that also take calendar and date time kind?
I think mostly because you can't get it back once you constructed it.
That's right.
Because it's a computation.
Date time kind you can. The calendar, I guess you can't.
Yeah, but I mean, the goal here is not just matching the constructors, but the goal is to match the user scenarios that really need this. I mean, I don't think people care much about like getting all parts, including in kind property. I mean, I don't think anybody will do that. So the listed here is just like what I think like people is going to use. Even as I mentioned about like for date time, I mean, the first two deconstructor is more the two ones that I think many people is going to use. The third one unlikely to be used much. So if we need to have like the deconstructors here, I would say like just keep the first and second one for sure. I mean, third one is good. I mean, but it's not that necessarily. Adding kind or any other properties, I don't think we need to add those to the deconstructors. I don't think it will be valuable.
Emo said because we have constructors to take them, so I'm asking the in extremis question to see where we actually feel about things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, I think to me it's kind of you want to match the spirit of the constructor, right? Not necessarily the actual signatures, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it is, I think to me, it's kind of like for a date only and a time only, I think it makes sense what I have on screen. But like for a daytime, maybe it's just me, but I just don't find it natural to think of a daytime as being a year, month, day, hour, minute, second, millisecond, microsecond, right? It's just not my mental model of a daytime. But I guess that's just maybe because we don't think in this.
I mean, I often think of date-time offset because I don't use date time anymore as year, month, day, hour, minute, second, millisecond, because that's the components that you would write in a log of recording a timestamp.
Interesting.
I don't think of it as like I'm always thinking of it as that 7 tuple.
So then, by that logic,
either that or it's a comparable. Those are
then,
the only two things it has for me.
But then, by that logic, you would basically find the deconstruct as a proposed here like logical, right? Because it's basically giving you those components out, right?
The what's currently shown is the middle deconstruct, assuming because the thing that's missing is none of them ever go to millisecond without going to microsecond. I've never used microseconds because.
Oh, I see. You only care about the millisecond one.
Right, because if you like thinking about log or common log timestamps, you get people who think seconds is good enough, and if you look at server logs, they tend to go about 4 decimals of precision in the milliseconds, aka the milliseconds. So that's
how far
out I think of it.
Like not having one that stops at milliseconds is kind of weird. It's like a common stopping point of precision.
But at the same time, what I'm largely doing of them is, if I'm writing them into a log, then the format method does that for me.
So then, So your proposal then, I think, is, if I remember correctly, is like you would only have one deconstruct method for each, and you would basically just give datetime as a date only and time only, and then a date time offset as a date only, a time only, and a time span, and then just leave the detailed one on date only and time only.
That would be my starting position. I can certainly accept a notion that the top two constructors on date time are extremely common, and that we're accelerating a very common scenario. For me, it just deconstructing date time offset into year, month, day, and an offset feels weird. And then if we don't,
I agree with that. Yeah.
So the year, month, day one on date time offset just feels wrong in a way I can't explain.
Yeah.
Because it takes an offset, right? Like it was just, or
right, because like why is the if you want to say just the year, month, and day are important to you, and you're going with whatever day was reported in this value, and not what would it be in the time span and the offset that you're interested in, then it just feels.
Yeah,
because then if you want to know what day it was, now you actually need to know the hour, because that's involved in the offset, and then like Lord Howe Island, etc. You care about the minute. So
yeah, the offset makes sense to be exist only if there is time exist with it. I mean, yeah, I agree with that. So the first deconstructor of date time offsets, I agree with you about like we shouldn't have this one. But the question now is the other two. I mean, does it make sense or not?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by we shouldn't have it. I think it's fine to have that method except for the out parameter for offset, right? I mean, it still makes sense for me to say datetime, what day is it, right? I mean, that seems like a reasonable question to ask, right?
Yeah.
So I just... Because, I mean, if you print the calendar, you don't care about the hour.
My position here, and maybe this is a little out there, it's like I think we're working too hard to not add like one extra parameter. I just like millisecond and not microsecond, because then it would have like the same arity as second with an offset, which doesn't work well with var. And I don't want to deconstruct into an offset like hardly ever at all. Like there's still a separate property for it, right? And I would rather just like stick with just ints and like add one that ends at millisecond, and like not have this like sharp corner where if you add one parameter, it doesn't compile. Like I just wanted milliseconds. Like why do I have to take microseconds now? And then also an offset. Like,
so are you suggesting just to not include offsets at all in the deconstructors, or?
For the datetime offset. I know it kind of sounds weird, but that's what I'm feeling right now. Because like you can get that separately with the property. I don't know. A lot of times you're normalizing these anyway. You might argue you should just use datetime if you know the offset's always UTC 0, but I don't know. That's my position though. Like I feel like this is more ergonomic if you don't have the offsets in the deconstructor.
I mean, I would go the other way and say it's more ergonomic if we get rid of all the int deconstructors. Like, start with, if we're saying we're dipping our toe in the water with more deconstructs, like date time offset, we can start with just date only, and time span, and then see what people come back and say they really wanted.
Would we also do date only, time only, or would we expect people, or would we?
Sorry, date only and time only. Like date only and time only, I think we should expand to have all of the constructor patterns as deconstructor patterns.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
And then date time, we would also add the date only and time only. And then if we want to say year, month, day, and year, month, day, hour, minute, second are going to be extremely common on those, and we want to go ahead and put those in as accelerators, then sure. And maybe but basically, to restate, it's for date time, I think we should say add a deconstruct, whether it's an extension method or an instance method, that deconstructs to date only and time only. Date time offset, date only, time span, fill out date only, time only, and then now we can talk about adding some other things. But I would start with just getting rid of all the int ones on date time and date time offset. I know
For
that you're
datetime-
going to want to put them back, but
For datetime offset, would there be a deconstructor that doesn't give you the offset?
no, because
Or-
it's a tuple of date, time, and offset. That's what the name says.
All right. I mean, presumably, like a lot of these proposals are throwing out info when you deconstruct, right? It's not giving you everything. Like even date time isn't telling you whether it's like local or not.
Right. Yeah, I did ask about the date time kind, and Emo shrugged.
Yeah, I don't think I ever cared about that. That's one of those things. Is like, I mean, maybe, but I just never had that question. So then,
Go ahead.
so I mean, I think I can get behind that. I think to me the problem really is like on daytime offset. If we provide these overload conveniences, then we really get into this problem of arity, ambiguity between, you know, time span and non-time span for time, right? So I think if we just say you only get the 3 things out of it, then I think it's relatively easy to sidestep that.
Right. And then if it sounds like, Emo, you're saying you think that our overloading guideline for deconstruct should be, don't just go with the language allows it, but only have one thing of each arity.
Yeah, because if you don't, then you basically screw with everybody who likes var.
I mean, that's fine with me, but
Yeah,
yes.
I don't think that's working. That's workable anymore.
Right, and so then that means if we have the date only time span, then date time offset never gains year, month, day, no fourth output, because that's 2, 3 arity deconstructs,
Right.
which is fine. You can, as you mentioned, you can do the double parenthesis of do double deconstruct.
Right. I think the only argument against them is perf, right? So if because I mean you have to call the deconstruct twice now, right? Or the compiler does it for you, right? I think from a convenience standpoint, I think the only having the date only, time only, and time span overload, I think is fine because you can effectively, relatively easily, you know, open any of them up to more parameters if you wanted to. But it just means that the compiler has now to call the deconstruct method twice, right? But I assume on date only and time only there's less computation because we store them differently, right? Or is that not true?
Well, date time stores them all as one 64-bit value,
Right.
and they don't break along a 32-bitness. So we do math to mod out the time, and then different math to mod out the date. Well,
I see.
Yeah. I'm a mathematician. I can use words however I want. So breaking them into the date only and time only, that is a piece that would have been involved in doing the rest of the breakdowns, but you are expanding your storage.
Right. So yeah, I think for date only it's easy to add the other ones. I think for daytime offset is the only one where we kind of have to decide now, and then if we go with the threeple, then you never get the one that just gives you a year, month, and day.
Which I think is fine.
I wonder how many people are going to like switch from date time to date time offset. And well, I guess the types will change. It's very unlikely that. So you would change things and things would still compile and you wouldn't notice.
Yeah. So Tarek, are you happy with that or unhappy with that?
Yeah, just to be clear about like for date time and date time offset, we will have deconstructors, which is return date only, time only, and for date time offset, we'll have date only, time only, and time span, right? This is one thing, but we are going to still have the deconstructor that return year, month, day at least for date time and date time offset.
For date time offset, no.
Because for datetime offset, it would mean you would overload on arity 3, right? Because you have one that gives you date only, and time span, and you have now one that gives you 3 ints. And that doesn't work anymore with var.
Right.
And it could be year, month, day, and offset, but I think we all agree that feels weird.
Right.
For time only, would we ever do just hour, minute?
Yeah, I think we should expand date only and time only to just match their constructors.
Do we have to add the constructors?
I mean,
Do
we
we
should
need that?
consider it. It seems weird that you can go one way but not the other, but I don't think it's required if you really feel strongly about it to not have them, but
Yeah.
When we added deconstruct on value tuple and friends, we seem to have done most of those as extension methods, presumably for some sort of net standard, net framework alignment. Do we need to take that into account here?
I don't think so. I think tuple was weird because that one shipped out of band on day 1, right? But I think we haven't done this for the other ones, I think. I don't think there's an extension method for key value pair. I think we just put it on key value pair. Pretty sure.
Fair enough.
I think same with index and range. I don't even think there's one for index, only one for range.
Yeah, key value pair does have it as an instance method.
Yeah.
It's EB never.
Yeah, because you never call it manually, right?
Okay, so should all these deconstructs be EB never?
Probably.
This is reasonable to me, at least.
I missed the first part of the discussion. Sorry, I'm late, but are we sure this still aligns with like the original goal of this proposal?
What was
Like
the original goal then?
It says allow retrieving the group of date and time parts in one call. This will help with performance and code writing / reading clarity. Like if I want to get the year, month, and day out of a date time, now it's 2 deconstructs, right?
Well, it depends on what you do, right? I mean, like, yes, it is 2 deconstructs, which you can write inline, right? But just putting more parentheses.
Is that helping with the code reading clarity?
Well, I guess it depends on what you want, right? So, like, the problem I think is like, what do people want to get out of this? Are they really gonna get all components? Because that seems fairly unlikely, right? Like, they probably want
Getting
either
the year, month, day of datetime.now seems like a pretty common thing. Like that's the code sample that was written at the top in the proposal.
Right, but presumably hour, minute, and second of datetime.now are also fairly common, and we can't have 2 different 3 int out deconstructs.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think so what you can do now is basically you can do, let me just write it down here so we get a sense for what they would look like.
How likely do you think the jitter would like inline the 2 deconstructs?
My recollection, but Jan could correct me, is that the JIT never inlines an out.
I don't believe that's the case.
Okay, or rather, I
don't
thought
know.
it was special only for value tuple, like that they did special work on that one.
No, I mean, methods with outs will be inlined.
Okay.
I don't know if this particular one would be for other factors, size or whatnot. I think a more relevant thing would be if a primary purpose of this is to avoid repeated calculations. Tarek, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the calculation is going to be repeated to extract. Is going to be done to extract the date portion of the date time, and then another calculation is going to be done to extract the year, month, day from that. And I don't know. I suspect some of that is overlapping.
No, I mean, like, the date calculation is, you can think about it, date calculation is one part and time calculation is another part.
No, I understand
But it's
that
not
part.
overlap.
But if I'd have to look at the method, but how is the date portion of the number of ticks extracted? Is that a single multiply? Is that extract the year, month, and day, create a date only from it, and then when you deconstruct it, you extract the date, year, month, day again?
Yeah, I mean, like, we have something like, we can say it like ticks per day, I mean, right? I mean, we just divide by ticks by days, and the fraction will be time, and the rest will be date and time, date on.
Okay, so we're not having to extract year, month, and day twice. We basically, in one division, we can separate.
Oh, I mean, like, every part is another calculation. I mean, like, I'm talking about if you want to get the year and month and day, so this is a 3 calculations, and depends on it. Yeah,
I understand that part. What I'm trying to say is the original request was basically be able to extract year, month, day in one shot from the date time. This has evolved to be first extract a date only from the date time, and then extract year, month, day from the date only. And that latter part is going to be the same as the previous, what the cost before. So I'm questioning the overhead of extracting the date only from the date time, because that is pure overhead compared to what was being requested.
So time only just assigns ticks after checking that ticks isn't like over max value, and date only divides ticks by ticks per day and assigns that. Like, so creating these are cheap.
Right. So the overhead is a single division. That was my question.
Right. Yeah. And then if you look at like date time dot month, that has to compute a days since March 1st value, and date time dot day also computes a days since March 1st value. So once you're down at the what day and what year am I in, those start with repeated work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the expensive part, if you want to get like every year and month and day together, this is the expensive part. I mean, if you get every one separately, so it will be 3 repeated calculations. But if you will get it just one shot, it will be just one calculations which return this report. Yeah.
So I think the answer to my question is yes, this still fits with the main goal. Maybe not the clarity, but
yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? To me, they're kind of orthogonal almost, right? We could decide that we have these accelerators, at least for daytime, right? The problem really is with daytime offset where it's really the arity, where you have this ambiguity at some point between time span and some other component, right?
I would say if we look to the main scenario here, I would suggest to keep the deconstructors that return year, month, day in both date time and date time offset.
Right, but we can't have it in date time offset.
Well, we can't have it with so, I mean, we could also decide we don't do the date only, time only thing entirely, right? And the only thing we have are these, component-based ones. And then we just say for date only, time span, if you want them, we can give you a method that gives you a tuple.
Can we just mirror the constructors in general, or is that not possible? Like, if you have a constructor for XYZ, then you have a deconstructor for XYZ.
That's basically what the original proposal is, right?
What's terrible about that?
to me, it just seems weird that you have to get a lot of values if the only thing you cared about was, let's say, time. Because we can only grow to the right?
I mean, can we do a hybrid of all, like date only, time only, add constructor and deconstructor for date only, time only, and then add deconstructors for all the constructors that exist?
No, that's the thing we can't do. That's basically we can do it for datetime, we can't do it for datetime offset. Because datetime offset basically deconstruct you can only really overload based on arity, or it will stop working for people using var, right? And so the problem is, can you, like, if you have one constructor that takes 3 arguments, that is date only, time span, and then you have another constructor that takes 3 ints, year, month, day. Well, now you can't have them as deconstructors anymore, right? You would have to choose which one you give you. Either the date only, time span, or the date, time, as a year, month, day. And that's the unfortunate thing. And so that's why we have to decide which pattern we're going with.
Right. Types can overload in constructors, but they can't overload in deconstructors.
Yeah. Well,
the language says they can. Emo is proposing a rule that says they can't.
So if we do it, basically, it just means that you now have to specify the types for every single component, right? In order for that to work. You can't do what's on screen right now. Which is what I think a large chunk of our customers want to do.
Okay, at least we can we keep the deconstructor for year, month, day on date time?
I think there is nothing wrong with that. The only thing I don't like about it is that we say we have one way of doing things on datetime and a different way of doing it on datetime offset. But yes, from a type system
How's
standpoint,
datetime offset a problem? You have date only, time only, and time span.
Right.
And then you have year, month, day, and time span.
No, that's the one we don't want to have, because it's very weird to get a day, like basically get the date portion and an offset that makes 0 difference unless you talk about time, right?
I mean, it does make a difference, right? Because if I say datetime offset .now, like in my world, it's 11:29, but in Japan, it's 11:30.
But that's the point of, if you say it's November 29th in UTC -7, it's like, cool. What time is it? Because that tells me whether it's November 29th or November 30th, as far as I'm concerned. So without the time component, the offset is meaningless.
Right. I agree with that. So, okay. So going back, I mean, like your point, Emo, about like not having the deconstructor for year, months, day on date time is like a kind of like duplicated functionality we're providing, or what? I mean, I'm not clear about that.
No, I think the problem is, so I think logically what you want people to think about is you want to think of date time effectively as a mirror of datetime offset, right? So it's a bit weird that you can get year, month, day directly from a datetime, but you can't do that on a datetime offset, right? At least for me, that seems unfortunate. But I think, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, I guess. So if you really feel strongly that we want to do that, I think that would be fine. But
yeah, I preferring having this, as I mentioned about, like, this is actually the main scenario that it's requested most of the time.
Sure.
People need to get year, month, day, I mean, from the date time or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, date time offsets, I mean, is still, I mean, date time offsets have a property called date time, which is can give you the date time only. And from date time, you can get year, month, day still.
I guess that's fair. You could say datetime offset dot datetime dot, and then you just deconstruct that guy. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's still the question of, is year, month, day the most common triplet of value to get out of datetime?
Yeah.
And if we want to say there's a constructor that takes year, month, day, so we're matching the deconstruct pattern, I think like in a UI application, which is what's most likely to use datetime instead of datetime offset, probably people know the date, and hour, minute, second is probably the most common triplet they're going to pull. But for that, they have to grab the time only and deconstruct that.
Yeah. So yeah, I hope we can get back the deconstructor for year, months, day for date time. Also, I want to talk about like the proposed constructor for date time, taking date only, time only. I'm not sure because like, should we add the kind to it or not? Because like you are constructing date time now. I mean,
Well, isn't that logically the same as calling datetime with year, month, day, hour, minute, second?
Well, I think it's if we're going to add date only and time only constructor, we should add date only, time only, and kind.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So if there's a constructor that only takes year, month, day, hour, minute, second, and no datetime kind, isn't that the same thing?
Right, but then there's
Yeah,
the
but-
overload
but-
that also takes the kind. So we should add the
Oh, I see you saying you would offer both, not just one. I see. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I guess that's fair.
We can also, we can. Date time offset has a constructor that takes the date only and time span. So we could add a to deconstruct here, or we can say there's already properties for both of those and there's no work involved in calling either of them. So we don't need the deconstruct, which is fine. That's less is more. I like less is more.
Sorry, I'm confused. What were you saying? You would say you don't have a deconstruct on datetime offset at all. You would just say you would call the
No. What we have for date time offset is fine. I'm just saying we can go lower because date time offset has a constructor that is composed of a date time and an offset. So composed of 2 pieces instead of 3. So we could deconstruct it back into those same 2 pieces, but that's exactly the same as calling the datetime offset dot datetime property and the datetime offset dot offset property. There's no
like
sure.
saving in that one, but we could
what
do
is API's review's perspective on datetime versus datetime offset? Because like oftentimes you could use one or the other. Like, do we want to encourage new APIs that like give you date times?
I believe the guideline
Yeah.
says don't add date time to any new API.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to like reality of where we are, right? I mean, datetime offset was introduced, I think, in the Whitby timeframe, so it's around for a long time, and it has failed to kill datetime, right? So the reality is that people live in code bases that use both, right? So we can now decide
also-
that we don't want people to use it, but like that doesn't change the fact that they are forced to use them, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but like it's not that hard to get a date time from a datetime offset. Like I don't think we need to add deconstructors.
No, I think the question is just like if you have them, are they usable, right? So I think to me, it's not an argument to not have deconstruct methods on datetime just because people use the datetime offset, right?
Yeah, apparently
Yeah,
our guidelines aren't clear. Don't use date time. It's use date time for things such as what time does the store open?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's
Oh,
your store
okay, so
opens at
the-
9, no matter what the time zone is.
Date time by itself is useful in most of the cases. I mean, like, because like if nobody cares about zones, time zones or anything, so date time is the right thing that encapsulate that date only and time only. So if you care about date and time only, you don't care about time zones. So date time is really very, very useful here. So you don't have to care about like what offsets, why we have offsets inside the structure like date time offset.
Right.
So the guidelines is like if you are using any operations that it will involve time zones, so date time offsets should be the ones that to use. But still, I mean, like using date time it's by itself, if you don't care about time zones, so this would be okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Right. So what the guidelines say, and I think it's the same as what you were saying. The guidelines say date time offset represents a point in time, and date time represents what something says on the clock and calendar, which is not the same thing as a point in time.
So the other problem though with exposing just date time is like, would it be the UTC date time or the like date time without the offset?
It's whichever property you call.
And this is for deconstructing a date.
Oh.
Oh, I see. No, so the offset's the other parameter in this deconstructor, right? So it would be,
in date time
it would be
offset
local time.
be the one that is correct for the offset.
Right. So to answer, I think the unspoken question, like a date time offset could say, you know, I am 8 a.m. you know, Pacific time on some day, or I'm 9 a.m. Mountain time on some day, or whatever. Like there are multiple representations of the exact same point in time. So whatever offset is baked in, I think, is what Jeremy was saying, is what would just get deconstructed back out to you.
And would it be an unspecified date time kind?
Datetime offset doesn't have a kind.
No, when you deconstruct the date time offset to a date time, what's the kind of and an offset? What's the kind of the date time?
Well,
Not
the
UTC.
deconstruct returns a date only, not a daytime.
No, but it has
We
a
were
daytime
talking about
property.
one. We were talking about the date time one though,
Oh.
like adding a deconstructor for date time and offset. I think.
Internally, it's stored as a UTC datetime plus an offset. So probably that.
Yeah, or that's a good reason to say call the property.
Right,
In
that's
fact,
what
we
I'm
don't-
asking.
Yeah, apparently we have 3 properties on date time offset. We have date time, local date time, and UTC date time.
Right, so one's without the offset, the other's converted to UTC, and the other's converted to that system's local time. I was just looking at it myself, but yeah, so.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we have 3 date timeouts is why means we shouldn't add the date time and time span deconstruct.
Right. Are we then happy with what's on screen right now?
I'm good with that.
Did we not want the 2 int deconstruct on time only? I thought we were just going to match the deconstructors on those.
Oh, you mean just year and month, no day?
On time only, we have hour, minute, second, hour, minute, second milli, and hour, minute, second micro. So time only should gain
I see.
a 2-component one.
I see. I thought you meant date only. Okay, so then.
And then, yeah, date only has the 3, or the 3 plus a calendar. And we said, since you can't get the calendar back, that's a good reason to not give it to you. So, yeah. There we go. It only took an hour and a half, spread across 2 sessions. Nice, easy proposal.
All right, so then we got there in the end.
I now feel vindicated and
Not using the time last time.
yeah, when I was like, yeah, we're not gonna finish anytime soon.
So, Tarek, just to confirm, date only is Julian calendar, right? Always and forever?
Yeah,
Okay.
Gregorian calendar.
Gregorian, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
The other
You
Julian.
not believing in leap year.
I don't remember my monks.
Oh boy. All right, so I think
Well, one's a pope and the other's an emperor. Well, sorry, dictator for life.
so now that Miha is back, we can probably go to this one here now.
Oh no.
'Cause it was the other one that was marked blocking.
I should go back to tactics. Go ahead. I thought this was approved like a few weeks back.
Yeah, so we recently approved the set of index of any values APIs. In that form, it's just an opaque class you get back from the static factory, and you pass that into span index of any APIs, right? We've rolled this out in a few places in runtime already. And one pattern that has come up a few times now is where you before have some way of checking whether a character is in a set. You now replace all of that logic with a vectorized code path with the index of any values. But there are some edge cases where you might still only want to check whether a single character is in that set. and now you're left with either leaving all that old logic for checking that single character around, or maybe having a separate constant around a constant string or something just for those single character lookups. So we're proposing adding another API on the index of any values instance you get, which is just a contains of a single value. And another point here is that the whole idea of index of any value is that we analyze your set of values and produce what's the most optimal way for lookups. So these internally already have a notion of this fast contains on a single character because they need it for short inputs before we can do vectorization.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and this is still limited to byte and char, correct?
Yeah, so like the API is D, but you can only create the byte and char ones from the factory.
Seems reasonable.
So the current type has no instance members. No, it has no public members. And it definitely has no public virtual members. So did we want everywhere else that we have one of these, we hid the virtual? Are we intending to expose the virtual here, or are we doing the virtual hide that we're doing elsewhere?
So currently, like, we completely hide any members, right? I don't know whether we care. I'm fine either way. It's really just an implementation detail. Because
your question, Jeremy, is just whether we have virtual on contains or not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As long as we validate that the perf is the same in the 99% case where this is in a static read only and it should get inlined and then devirtualized anyway. I would prefer having it not be virtual. Just it leaves the door open for for us in the future.
Right. So we'll do virtual in implementation, but not in contract.
Right. I mean, this wouldn't even be virtual in the implementation. It would be contains just delegates to contains core. That's virtual.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. The fact that we have built index of any values as using polymorphism is not apparent in its shape right now.
Right.
We cool with that then?
Just out of curiosity, we consider making and I'm sure I could look this up, a non-virtual method virtual, non-breaking. Like, I know, like, there wouldn't be call for emitted from like old code, but does that matter?
In this case, it should be okay because no one's subclassing it. No one except for us is subclassing it.
I think the problem is that the compiler will generally emit a call word, but not in all cases, right? So base calls are the most obvious one where the compiler computes the base call and then just emits a non-call word like a regular call. Of course, in this case, you can't subclass it, but I think there were other cases where the compiler can know that there is an instance and it knows the instance is never going to be null. There are cases where the compiler currently emits a regular call as well. And so it's hard to
they're fairly rare. I think there was a quote-unquote optimization done of that variety to use call instead of callvert, I think with question mark dot.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't know. But other than that, it generally does virtual. But even if that, I don't think we would need to be concerned about it. But even if we were, we could always expose, if we really, in the future wanted to expose the constructors and whatnot here, we could have contains core be a protected
right
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, the virtual can always be exposed later through a core. I know we talk about the call versus callvert from the context of the CSC and Roslyn, but I feel like somebody said C++ CLI just does call versus callvert based on what the ref says to do.
That makes sense.
So while C++ CLI isn't very common, there are compilers for .NET that are not the C# Roslyn compiler, and the is adding virtual later a breaking change or not is more complicated than we usually give it credit.
Right, because it is legal to call an instance method on a null object. It's just the C# compiler doesn't let you do it easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we wanted to open the type up for people to actually be able to use it, then we would just add protected bool contains core, and it would just be a yep. When we created the thing originally, we said it wasn't virtual.
Cool.
Sweet. All right. So then,
Thanks.
thanks for coming. All right. So, who has context on this one? Or should we skip this one?
Well, that's a lot of words for a thing that says simplify.
I think without Tanner or Booyah here, we should skip it for now.
I agree. It doesn't look simple.
Says the guy whose issue will then be bumped up because of it. So
Of course.
yeah.
Good politicking.
Thank you. Okay, so for years, literally, we have had debates about how to expose the ability to split strings or spans in order to get back kind of sub regions without allocating. The allocations with string.split being the string array and then the string object for everything in the array, even though you frequently don't care about all the pieces or you don't actually need them as string objects, you could just use them as spans. And we have another issue that is still valid to discuss and potentially move forward that's focused on open-ended. I want to parse slightly more simply than using index of and slice, an arbitrary number of pieces out of an open-ended string or span. This one is focused on a fairly common set of patterns where you do know how many parts you care about. You're parsing a version, and so at most there are 4 parts, right? You're parsing whatever. In fact, the majority, well, maybe 50% or maybe slightly more of our own uses of split in .NET runtime, we know how many parts there should be. Either it's a fixed number or it's an upper bound. And the existing string.split accommodates that. It allows you to pass in the number of parts, basically, the maximum number of parts that it'll create. This basically layers on that pattern and says, basically with the same semantics and effectively signature, waving my hands a little bit, as the existing string.split, rather than passing in the count for the number of parts, pass in a span to be filled in, a span of ranges. So basically, rather than count, it's that span's length, and it'll fill in a range from the passed in span with exactly what you would have gotten out before as a string, and now you're just getting sort of the start and ending, position as that range. And rather than returning the array, it's returning you what would have been the length of the array. So it becomes fairly straightforward in most of these cases to change code that was using string.split in those patterns to then use this proposed API, which takes the source span, the destination to write the ranges into, one of a myriad of different separators, right? A char separator, a span of separators, and so on. Yeah, that's basically it. There's 2 variations of it. One where you're taking one separator that's either a single char or a span of chars, basically a string, and another where it's taking multiple separators. And this is to disambiguate when you get a read-only span char for the separator, whether it's one separator that's multiple chars long or multiple separators that are each 1 char long. I have some open questions around the naming, whether we should just call it split and split any rather than split as ranges. This is the best design I've come up with, and the thing I like about it is it is very close to what we currently have with string for the patterns that for code that uses the relevant patterns.
So what's your behavior for if I split, let's say, on comma, and there I say for number of elements 2, but there's 3? Do you basically give me the comma plus the rest in the third element, like what string split does?
It's exactly what string split does. So for example, if you want to make sure that you're parsing something that should have 2 parts, you pass in a span of length 3, and then you're guaranteed that you basically then you just check to see whether they've returned 2. Right. And as long as it returned 2, you're good to go. If it returned anything else, it's a failure.
Gotcha. Yep, that makes sense
to
me.
What makes ranges convenient, right, is that if, like, looking at your example code, if you use it in a span indexer, it slices.
So there's a few benefits to range. One is on all of our types now, you can slice with it. 2 is if you had a string or a memory or anything else that you can get a span from, you get back a range that then you can use on that original thing. So you're not sort of limited to the data structure that this is providing. You can go back to the original data source and work with the range on that thing. And the most important one is we don't have span of spans. So basically, right. Range is the next best thing.
Sure. So yeah, I buy range is super nice, especially with the splice thing. I was wondering, like, I mean, you must have considered something similar for index of with like span of offset.
I don't understand.
So I mean, in some ways, I guess it depends on how you're using it. But I was just thinking that the range is a little bit redundant in that, like, you know the width and everything, so like you don't
know the width
of the separator. Sorry,
there's the string.
So if you know the index of the next, so if you know like the index of the next thing, right?
But not. You mean sure? Yes, you could. That's true for all but the first.
Yeah, it also depends on what you do with string split options, right? If you say trim, for example, then you replicate a decent amount of work.
Yeah, trim and skip empty means you don't actually know. That's a great point.
Wait, say it again about trim.
If you specify trimming and remove empty, for example, you might jump ahead 100 even though your separator is only 1 long.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also, even if you could compute it, it's that kind of math that makes it extremely inconvenient to use, right? Because now you have to, look at the next element, get the width, and it's just not pleasant. Right?
Yeah, I mean, in general, the splitting is, if you don't care about trimming, you don't care about remove empty, split isn't saving you a ton over just using index of. But it's that monotonous index of slice, and so having to do the plus char of separator dot length is just adding more to that boilerplate. Plus, it doesn't work in the case where you were specifying options.
Yeah, I was just wondering as like potentially a perf benefit to effectively like vectorize, like index of more, even when you have like a single separator, like to return multiple results at once, to replace that kind of loop that you might do manually. But yeah, I don't know. The range seems more convenient.
I mean, this if we want to, this can still use vectorization in its implementation to find all the separators. I don't know that that's going to be useful, but it would do that regardless of what it was returning.
Right.
Is this going to throw for 0 and 1 length destinations?
It behaves exactly as string split does in that regard.
Fair
if you specify a 0 count, you get back an empty array. If you specify 1, you get back the whole thing as the single range.
Okay.
In fact, my local prototype of this, I literally plugged it into all the existing string split tests to ensure the behaviors when a count was provided were identical.
Fair enough. I mean, presumably you could just rewrite the existing string split on top of this. It may end up less efficient, but
It's you can't necessarily do that because you don't know how many matches you'll get ahead of time.
Yeah, the one place where that falls apart is the default for string split is a count of int.max value, which you wouldn't have with where you have to pass in the.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's a big array.
And then the so these are extension methods. So inference to string won't apply. Are we being intentional in that because we expect that somebody should do as span before they start subranging it?
Yeah, I mean, I figure in a bunch of our thing on memory extensions, we've basically been keeping it at span. If people want strings, to use strings, they use as span. I think we should continue with that until we find a really good reason to start adding additional, doubling the number of overloads or whatever. We already double it for read-only span and span.
Yeah. The problem really is like it's like the only benefit is discoverability, right? Because it's not really usability, right? Because you still have to deal with all the funny stuff that comes from spans, right? So
right, but if you were to call string.new split and get back a bunch of ranges, the doing string and indexing, string sub range that allocates a string, which may be what you want. Or you may have just been wanting to pass that to, input parse, which means now we'll get the, you should call as span from the analyzer. It's really hard to think with a cat in your face.
The cat was really not. It was cute.
Well, the pattern is the same. The arguments are different. You have to pass in a span versus not. So, I mean, you're already making changes to your call site. Adding .as span doesn't seem like a huge extra burden.
No.
Right. Yeah, but this would be if you called new slice on if we added the string overload. So you call new slice, you get back a range, you call int.parse of text sub ranges sub 2. I think I don't know if an analyzer is going to fire on that to be like if you had as spanned before you did that index, it would have called without allocating. Like I think that's going to be hard to detect. But so that's the thing I was thinking of if you were being intentional and not letting it light up on string.
You mean, was I thinking that far ahead and saying that might be difficult for us to catch, so we shouldn't have that pit of failure?
Well, that and that you don't like that string subrange is allocating.
Yeah, I love that you're giving me the benefit of the doubt here, but no, it was just I don't want to have to add another double the number of overloads.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, also, like, it doesn't seem it's impossible to track, though, even if you went down that path, right? Because it's still the same pattern. It's like basically you do something that span would have done for you, right? You basically have to just look at the method you're calling, whether that accepted a span and whether the call site would have been as spannable with the argument, right? Which we could generalize as an analyzer if we wanted to.
I guess it's true. The analyzer might detect if you did original string sub range and pass that into .parse.
Because it has an overload that takes a span, yeah.
I mean,
Maybe.
We could also just optimize that in the jet too.
I think the analyzer is likely to detect that if you assigned it to a read-only span local. But I don't know if it would. I don't remember if we made it look across overloads to see you could have saved work here.
We probably didn't, but I mean that's something that what I'm saying is like if that were something we were concerned about, I think it's a reasonable analyzer to do, which doesn't seem, extraordinarily expensive to run. I think the question really is like what do we want the pattern to be? And I think I kind of like the idea that because the problem really is that the semantics of these no allocation APIs seem to be substantially different from what we want the convenience ones to look like. So like I think you're better off just saying you have to do this as span thing, you have to buy into the span universe with all the things that come with that, and then the coding patterns you get there are just different because it's just a different way to think about your data.
Well, Are we sure that someone's actually going to have a string as input anyway, as opposed to input that's already a read-only span of char?
I mean,
Like
in my
I would
case-
expect that if I'm calling this API, my input is already a read-only span of char. Like I don't have a string as input to my method, in which case all of this conversation just kind of is moot, right?
I think that might be the case with new
Sometimes.
code, but in terms of trying to whittle away at some existing code, a lot of times it is a string that's coming in, at least in our code base, which goes
Right,
back
'cause
20 years.
you currently have a string. You're calling string dot split, the one that takes how many splits do you want it to do. This is not a drop-in, but a near replacement for that. And
Yeah.
does it even tell you, hey, if you already knew you were going to get, in things, you could ask us to give you the answer.
So
I
I was
guess.
thinking.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was thinking of like a place where we could use it, right? Which is why I brought up like kind of the index of any scenario instead of like the ranges. Like though perhaps you could use ranges, but like on a span of byte of UTF-8 headers, like often comes in request headers in like a single receive call, and like we used to vectorize that ourselves, right? Looking for the carriage returns and line feeds until like memory extensions span of byte index of got vectorized, and like we wanted to let anyone like get that performance optimization. We could test it out, right? But I assume that like if we could just look through the entire receive span in one go and like store the offsets in a span event or something, and then actually look up either cache versions of the headers or create strings for header values and stuff. Like we can test that, of course, without making a public API, but like it seems like there might be a win there.
I for what it's worth, I think there might be value in that as an API. I don't think that's this API. That's effectively the inverse. You want to find all occurrences of something.
Right.
I don't think that's what this is.
Okay, fair enough.
This could potentially build on top of that if there was value in doing so. But I don't think that's what this API is. And I think trying to use this for that would be adding more cost than you'd want.
Right, because for the HTTP headers, you need to know that you found the colon versus the new line, because you don't want somebody to be able to write header new line fake value. Like you don't want to get the confusion of you called a like, oh, just match anything, and they probably gave me conforming data.
Stefan's comments do raise one design choice I made, which is if you scroll back up to the APIs I'm proposing, they're all char. So I haven't proposed any that are based on arbitrary T's. We could. I just didn't have a scenario for it, and this was meant as people parsing strings. So that's what I focused on.
Would you still use string split options for like?
Well, that's the other thing. I don't know what that would mean.
I mean, it's still trim and remove empty.
Yeah, none of it's like hard.
What does trim?
What does trimming mean, and what does empty mean?
I mean, doesn't it just mean that if there are repeated instances of the separator, remove it, and if the entry would only be the separator?
Well, trim specifically means remove white space.
Or empty would be anything zero length is removed.
Oh, sorry.
Correct.
Are we talking? Oh, we're talking the. Okay.
Oh, I misunderstood.
In my head, you said byte for UTF-8.
Yeah.
Okay,
what does white space mean
on
on
the separator? Okay, I didn't realize it was like whatever we consider white space.
Yeah. Like if the API were explicitly written as like, split Latin 1, split UTF-8, split whatever. Like if you take the encoding as a parameter, then yes, you can detect white space. If it's just ROS byte without encoding, like God help you at that point. Because you don't know what
if you're
doing.
truly trying to make it generic and have some concept of like, splitting just ints or whatever, it'd be even more weird.
Well, remember, headers are not UTF-8, headers are Latin 1.
I mean, you think that.
I think that because I know what the RFC
like,
says.
the spec is surprisingly ambiguous when people use UTF-8
No, it's
and you
not.
know it.
The
Oh,
spec
come on.
says follow what MIME says, and MIME is Latin 1. It's just everybody bastardized it to say UTF-8 after the
Whatever,
fact. We
people want
retconned it.
UTF-8.
They
Give the
do.
people what they want.
Yeah, give the people, non-conforming web servers. But anyway, yeah.
Anyhow, that is all to say, we could add a split T-based overload. It wouldn't take a string split options. I just figured we could do that in the future if we, got stronger demand for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with my general. I don't like when we use byte to mean char8. So if we wanted to add the UTF-8 one, then it would be split UTF-8.
Yeah, and as long as you say that in the method somewhere, then it should be okay if you want to add that in the future. But yeah, for things like float double, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Or we would just throw if you pass those options in. If you
Yeah,
have
that's
string
true.
split options. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't open it up to T. I'm saying if we think that the read-only span of byte, meaning UTF-8, is important, we can add that, but we should add the UTF-8 name in the method.
Right, at that point, the string split options and trimming would make sense.
Right,
Yeah.
because you've said these bytes mean UTF-8, and now we can talk about it in terms of strings. We get to decide if the separator's char or byte or both, or so I think it would take more thinking than maybe we're inclined to do right now. So we can start with the UTF-16 one and think about the UTF-8 one later. Or we can do it now, whatever people want.
I mean, given that it's 11:38, either one would work probably, because we can either finish this one or we can tackle one more.
So for some of the open questions or choices or whatever, all things are the bullets here. I agree that destination being where it is matches what we've said for span writing APIs. It's source, comma, destination, comma, any other options. So the signature, the things inside the parentheses, I think are all correct. The split as ranges versus split, I don't have strong feelings about. But maybe somebody else wants to.
I actually like the proposal of calling it split any. I think that would be more interesting.
Well, split any is the second too.
No, without the L. I think that's my preference. Okay, nobody.
Oh, I see. I have a typo.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, spit any. Ha.
Still works logically though.
It's because we're taking all the matches and putting them on a skewer.
Here you go.
And then roasting them. Yes, it's perfect.
I kind of like just split and split any. And if in the future we wanted another variation, it wouldn't have the destination span argument, so it wouldn't conflict, and it could still just be a different overload. When that returns some sort of enumerator, or Levi had also proposed some sort of tuple returning variations that could all be split as well, because they wouldn't take the destination, so they wouldn't conflict.
I think I generally prefer this because it seems to me that's we have done this in multiple other places, and I think there's generally benefit in presenting them as overloads, so you at least consider the other one that takes a buffer to write to, right?
Yeah.
Well, but what would you see this as an overload to? I mean,
if we were to add other variations.
Yeah.
Plus, it's sort of logically, it's sort of an overload of string.split, even though it's not actually an overload.
Yeah.
Right.
The only other devil's advocate argument I can maybe make is quite a few people, such as myself, have created our own split extension methods. And if this is just called split, and like, would we start seeing random compiler errors once we upgrade our apps?
Yes, but I think that's generally true for when you're extending types in the BCL with your own functionality, right?
Well, this would also this would be better in that scenario than just adding instance methods, which would definitely cause failures for you. these would be other extensions, so they should be on equal footing, and you'd be down to overload resolution whether it picks which one it picks.
Well, an instance method wouldn't produce a compiler warning. It would pick the new method over the extension method.
Well, that's what I meant. And the extension method that was using different arguments would then fail to compile.
Yeah, a span of range
Would it?
as the second parameter, I think, is unique enough where maybe this won't cause issues.
What
Jeremy, source breaking, not binary breaking, right? Like, if it chooses the new instance method, and then the source code doesn't compile because the types are wrong, like.
I thought you could overload across an instance extension boundary.
You can, and I think the compiler has some weird behavior though, where if the overload resolution on the type itself is successful, it doesn't even consider extensions. So that wouldn't. So if there's a better match due to implicit due to implicit conversions, for example, it would still prefer the instance one. But I think in general there is overloading between them, so you can have the same name in both places, right?
So what Jeremy's saying is if it wouldn't compile against the instance method, the compiler shouldn't choose that as an overload if there's a valid extension method overload. I'm actually not sure on that.
Yeah, every time I keep forgetting what the actual rules are, but there certainly is some, I think there is some rule where the instance, so you would not get a compile time error if there is an instance method that would have just worked.
Right, because extension methods, I believe they rescue compile failures.
Yes, effectively.
Yeah, I was wrong. It does.
Okay, good.
But extension peers, those are at the same
Yes, and then you get ambiguity
scope.
errors.
So now you're going to get a. Did you mean system memory extension split as ranges or Levi.mycool extensions split as ranges?
Yes, but I think to me
so the argument.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is the instance would actually be less source breaking because at least presumably if someone had like the exact same signature already. No,
right.
I mean,
well, we can't add an instance method here because we're specializing on the T.
Yeah, but I think
so.
But to answer your question, generally no, right? Because it's arbitrary code, right? So like the instance method might have different behavior that breaks you later, right? So I think that's why I'm saying in general when we add new APIs to types in the BCL, it can break anybody who defined their own extension methods over those types because it completely depends on what the shape is, what the arguments are, what the behavior is that they rely on, right? And so I would generally not use this as a decision-making point because then, anything could be argued against, right? It's just an impossible bar.
Yeah, I mean, we've brought it up before just from the perspective of like how many people might be affected by us adding stuff.
Yes. I just think that.
But you're right. I wouldn't use it as a reason against it.
Right. And that's also the kind of stuff where I'm actually happy when it breaks me, to be honest, because probably the built-in stuff is handling more cases than what I have. So
yeah,
it's usually a good opportunity to revisit whether I should delete my code and use the one that's in the book.
From my perspective, if someone doesn't have the same signature, then it's not going to conflict, and if they do, that speaks really highly of that they arrived at the same answers we just did. So
no kidding. I kind of like as ranges though, for like stuff like Googleability. I don't know. Like I don't know. It is kind of unique. It's in that split isn't giving you the data directly. Like it's giving you ranges.
Yeah, exactly. So telling you where the boundaries are. It's great.
But I don't feel super strongly. But it could be split.
But that one we have. I mean, like I think we have other overloads that give you the data in a different shape. Like that's not something that we invented here, right? That's something we have done in other places where in one case you get back an array, in the other case you pass in a span that we fill for you, right? So that's not entirely unheard of. And then the array gives you back a string, and then the span one might be just offsets, for example. We have also done that. So I don't feel like just because the shape of the return value is slightly different that it needs to have a different name. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just like, when I see this for the first time because I'm not in API review, and I'm like, what is this? Passing like right, like being able to just like Bing obviously split as ranges is nice.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I mean, like this is one of those things where you have to decide, right? So I, as I said, like I like the idea that we give it a simple name, because I guess if you deal with spans, that is the way you split a span, right? You shouldn't there shouldn't be any other API that gives you back arrays, right? That would be pretty weird. So in that sense, I'm not sure that using split as ranges is really giving us some opportunity to add some higher level split method later, right? It's going to be probably as close as you ever get. And I think there is value when you come from string.split and you go to read-only span of char, that you find the same things there, right? And yeah, of course their shape was going to be different, but it's still close enough that it's probably fine.
Well, there is a huge caveat that we need to put on here, which is the overwhelming majority of uses of string.split do not specify an explicit count, whereas this API forces you to specify an implicit count.
That is true. Although I don't think that's necessarily specific to split, right? I think any API that you pass an output buffer, like you basically have to decide upfront how big you make it, and then you may have to call the API multiple times to grow the buffer as necessary, right? So that in principle you could do here too. It's just most of the time you don't want it because you know what the answer is going to be for you to work.
Right, you would need to know when it's appropriate to grow the output buffer. But yeah, like Steve had already called that out, both in the discussion here and in the textual description. Like make sure the buffer is n+1 in terms of size.
Yeah, and I think in my case, I think I never ever passed in the size, but I will have said like almost all my use cases of Spring.split will check the return array size and bail if it doesn't have the right size. So in that sense,
correct. And yeah, and that's every single use I do does that as well. But the mental model here, the shift you need to make is you explicitly need to pass a destination length of n+1.
Right.
That's the trick.
The last one's Cooter.
Yeah, you have to, n+1 if you care about the exact number that were retrieved. If you know there's only going to be a single separator, so you have two pieces, then pass in 2 and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Because I've used the count one when I am doing something like CSV parsing, and I know I have 3 semantic columns, and then after that is free text where the commas might be text.
Right.
Yeah,
and I mean, you don't have to pass n+1, right? Because if there is multiple separators, it just means you get the separators and the whatever other values were in the last element, right? So your last element would no longer parse, right? If you expect like a digit, comma, digit, and then somebody gave you digit, comma, digit, comma, digit, it just means that your second element now has digit, comma, digit as the value. So
right.
Well, that could potentially change the flow of your business logic at this point.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Same thing as if you call string.split and pass it to.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes,
right.
exactly. I guess what I was arguing is people in practice tend not to do that. They tend to just call string.split and then check the return value .length.
Yeah, that's true.
Every single piece of code I've ever written does that. Because if the length is incorrect, I don't care that I did O of n work. I'm about to throw an exception anyway.
Yeah, I guess you've never written a CSV that had free text in the
If you parse a CSV and you use string.split, I'll find you. You're doing it wrong.
I support emo. Yes.
I've definitely done it.
Yeah, and I will down that.
Boo. Boo this.
But you would never do that in production code, Levi.
But I didn't use var, so it was okay.
So it sounds like we want to approve CSV parser in addition to this API.
No, this is our CSV parser, right?
Great.
It's just a really streamlined one. Come on, the CSV parsing component is just the 10 lines around this method call.
Yeah, so what, if anything, have we done for addressing the most recent YouTube comment when, the people who want the current string.span or string.split, the one, sorry, not the current because they're both current, but the one that doesn't take account, did we ever do a split enumerator, or is that still pending work after
we
this?
tried. We had an approved API. I don't remember exactly why, but we then backed it out and said back to the drawing board. So there's still an open issue for it. And the person who was the contributor who was working on it a few months back posted what they thought it should look like, and it's just been sitting there. So I think we should probably
revisit that as well. But both models of usage are valid, and I think we should have APIs for both.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
agreed. I want to say that the initial stab at it, because it tried to return a single enumerator type for any number of different options that were passed in, it ended up making the enumerator bloated and slow. But if you split it out into different method groups, in theory, that might address that problem.
Fair enough. It presumably also would have been it would have been a ref struct, and we would have approved it as such, but I think that would make it hard to use in an async method because you'd now have the for each state needing to float.
Right.
Right. So did we have an opinion on whether we want the suffix as ranges or not?
I thought the conclusion was we don't.
Sure. If it's analogous to string.split, just give it the same name.
Yeah,
I do like the any suffix though.
Yes,
Sure.
I would leave that one. I would just drop the as ranges.
Because even if we added later a span of string destination that allocates the string for you and looks exactly like the current string.split, like it still works. It's still splitting.
Right.
But I do like the range one because it lets you control your type. So again, to ask a question because it's an extension method, these are only on read-only spans. So if you have a writable span, you need to wrap it in a read-only span before you would see them. Granted, you can call it in a static call with a non-read-only span. But are we happy with only doing the read-only overloads?
I mean, again, I don't love the proliferation of overloads we have on memory extensions. We basically end up with two times two for a lot of different orthogonal factors. In this particular case, since the vast majority use case would seem to be on string or string derived things, it seemed like read-only span of char was going to be like the 95% use case. And it didn't seem worthwhile doubling for spans as well. So I figured we could start with this, and if we found we really needed it, add the others.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Like separately, is there a language feature under consideration that would allow span of t to coerce to read-only span of t for the purpose of extension method matching?
No, there isn't, and apparently that's kind of by design because they already do crazy gymnastics to keep the extension lookup reasonably cheap, and considering implicit conversions to all the possible types is just that would be too expensive, I guess.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
that
would be to all the possible types. I think it sounded sort of like Levi was asking, are we going to say read-only span and span are special?
Yeah,
right.
I think we would have to make a compelling case that special casing would be warranted, which I would venture a guess and say they would start with you need to really prove your case. I don't think we can do that.
Right. We would say the compiler can solve it, and they would say that the cost of the IL is low, and we should just keep overloading.
Yeah.
Right. And then Tanner and I would come along and say we want generalized const semantics in the language.
Yeah. All right, we are now at time, I think. It does make sense to start another one, unless there's something super quick, but I think none of them will be considered super quick, right? Maybe this one here would be, but this one definitely isn't. This one definitely isn't. Does anybody know what this one is?
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
This is basically James and from the ASP.NET team is asking for name pipes to validate when they are created the first time, which is something that we don't expose in .NET currently. So this is just taking one of the Windows flags and exposing it into the pipe options enum to make sure that the name pipe they want to create a communication channel, I think in Kestrel, and they just need to make sure that when they create the pipe does not exist for security reasons. that's why they need to. That's why they need this option. Right now there is validations in place that disallow options that are not part of the enum, so it will be good to expose it as an API.
I don't remember the details of our implementation. Here, do we have the ability to correctly emulate this in our Linux implementation, which has to do a bunch of gymnastics to try and achieve sort of the server count semantics that Windows has?
Yeah, no, I don't remember either. I think, for example, current user only. I think there is. I also don't remember if there is something that we do to emulate on Unix. It might as well just not do anything. I might need to double check that.
It needs to not.
Yeah, that'd be my concern. Right, that was going to be my concern. Is if this is a security feature, we can't just no-op it on Linux.
It either has to work or has to throw a platform not supported that you specified it.
Yeah, which we can also do for enum values. It's just usually more painful, but
I mean, NamePipes uses Unix domain sockets on Linux, right? Underneath the covers. So I mean, you could check if the file exists, right?
Well,
or
that's a talk to bug, but
yeah,
we have
fair
file.create new, which knows if it's creating the file versus opening an existing file. So theoretically, pipes should know the same thing on Unix, because on Unix everything's a file.
Right.
There may be a handshake of like you create the file and then you have to turn it into a pipe, and we get to decide. Yeah, there's maybe some race condition status of somebody else yanked on the file and changed it before you created it as a pipe, but I think we would still know it did not exist when we started this operation, and we know this to the level of the file system atomicity.
Right.
I might
try
be totally,
a move, right? Like
I might be totally misremembering the implementation. It's been years since I looked at it, but I seem to remember that we don't actually create the file. That when we call bind, that the sockets implementation on Linux creates the file.
Oh, that's true.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, if for whatever reason it's impractical to check that on Linux, like I'm looking through the code right now, and the Linux implementation rejects pipe options flags that it doesn't know anything about. So it would not be, it would be within the current behavior if we were to say that this flag is only understood by Windows and we don't have to make any changes whatsoever to Linux, and we'll just reject it.
Yeah, and James is going to be fine with that, to be honest, because like this is for Kestrel transport, which we already support Unix domain sockets through sockets.
Yeah.
So like this is for Windows.
Yeah. So what we might want to do then is it's possible to annotate individual enum options as for a specific OS, right?
yes, it basically basically means now every time you use the enum, you basically get a warning. So basically, you would have to guard the call side that uses the enum, which is not really where the work happens, right? It would really be when you construct the stream when we would throw, but that's just the way this works for enums, right?
Wait, is it flags every usage of the enum or just every usage of the one value within the enum?
The latter, but it basically means you get basically in the provided sample code here, right? You get the squiggly here rather than here, right? Because at this point we no longer know what the combinations of values was, right? But the exception will come from here, not from here, right?
Yeah, that seems totally fine to me, because if it means that whoever actually wrote, pipe options, pipe equals whatever dot first instance only, like it's on you to make sure that you're under a supported OS.
Right.
All right. Are we okay with that name, by the way?
Seems good to me. So the flag, I guess, is called.
Yeah.
It was written somewhere, like something pretty similar. Yeah, file flag first pipe instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it being closer aligned to the file create only seems nice, but if this is what a platform's already calling it, then Because really the assertion
a
is I better
server-
be the one creating it.
Is this a server side only option? What does it mean to be first on the client? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
Yeah,
think it's server
It's
only.
creation. Yeah.
Are you suggesting to change the name to first server only or something?
I don't know. I'm thinking through it. I'm the back of my brain is being tickled that maybe the option name could be confusing for someone creating a name pipe client stream. But it's probably fine. And if you're reaching for this, you're probably looking at the docs. So
we already support current user only on client, and it doesn't mean much, but it does do something on client.
on client, doesn't it mean the same thing as server, that you're only connecting to a server that's the same user as you?
Yes.
So that one seems to have a pretty good meaning.
Right. I mean, assuming that the pipes have a notion of client and server, the server can just also throw, or sorry, the client can throw of like, this doesn't make sense here.
Right. I think presumably if it doesn't make sense, we should do that.
Yeah, I mean, that would just be an argument exception, right? Like, you gave me a flag that doesn't make sense for this context.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
First pipe instance cannot be specified in client mode, or whatever.
All right.
So should we then approve it with this caveat that we just have, or do you want to put it back with needs work? I think it's fine to approve. To be honest.
I would like to approve it. I think some of these particular exceptions or particular annotations might fall out as we work on the implementation.
Right.
But I think we generally have a good grasp of what they would look like at a high level.
Right.
So I'm looking and I see pipe options being used in a lot of places. Are they all talking about the same pipe, or are there multiple kinds of pipes, and this option only makes sense for one of them?
Can you repeat the
You mean,
question?
do we have different pipe options with the same name and different namespaces? Is that what you're asking?
No, like I went and I found, at least I found a system IO pipelines pipe options.
Completely
Right. That's
unrelated.
different.
Okay, so I found the wrong pipe options type.
Yeah, this is the name pipes, right? Not the.
Not confusing at all.
Okay, I was looking at because I was looking at the usage of the other pipe options enum, and I was like, none of these things look like they're doing client or server mode. So is this type used by too many things, and we need to move this option elsewhere?
Yeah, the pipeline stuff is like the push stream kind of stuff that Kestrel uses. Hard to, buffered stream stuff.
But okay, as long as as long as we're talking about a thing that is only used in the one context of the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like pipe stream doesn't use the options, and anonymous pipe stream doesn't use them either. So, okay, so these are really named pipe options, and we just named the type wrong. Cool.
Well, I guess named pipes can also be unnamed, right? So there's that.
Pipe stream's the abstract base class for server and client name pipe stream.
Right. Well, there's also anonymous pipe server stream, and that one doesn't seem to use the pipe options. So.
Oh, I guess that's fair.
The only type that uses them is named pipe. Client stream and named pipe server stream, I think.
So,
right.
So it's the right type.
It's not an overly used type, yes.
All right, so then I guess this is it for today. And then I think next week is probably not going to happen anymore, right?
I'm still here.
Who is here next week from you guys?
I will
Jeremy.
be here.
I should probably be here.
All right, then how about we just try again next week, and then maybe we have another one or not.
Okay. Yeah, and then next week would be my last one for the year.
All right. So then one more. All right. Bye-bye.
One more day.